All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Sex Sells podcast, the podcast where we talk about dating, culture, and society from a male and a female perspective. Today, it's a fun one today. We are going to talk about the friend zone, but specifically the sorts of people who are always getting friend zoned. If you find yourself always in the friend zone, this podcast is for you, and we're going to get into that at the 3-minute mark. Before we do, a couple of announcements and sponsors. So the first big announcement is there is no more subscriptions for the podcasts. If you are a listener of Neel and Jordan, that one is on an indefinite hiatus. There's just a lot going on in Jordan's life, as I'm sure you can imagine after what happened to him last year. So I've decided to just pause all the sponsorships, all the subscriptions for now. And over the last 2 years, we raised $11,140 for charity. So big pat on the back for all of you who were subscribers. And that's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
And thank you on behalf of all the people who are going to be beneficiaries from that money as well. That's an incredible amount when you hear it like that. We'll probably introduce some new subscription options or some question options eventually for Sex Sells, but I'm just in the process of figuring out what those may be and how we'll go about it. So stay tuned. This podcast is sponsored by Crush Organics. Crush have a huge range of CBD oils and CBD oil products. They've got the pain cream, they've got the gummies, they've got regular CBD oil, diamond CBD oil if you're hardcore. I take a few drops of that before bed every night, sleep like a baby. Although from what I've heard, babies don't sleep very well, so I sleep like a toddler, like a child. Whoever sleeps well, that's me on Crush Organics. So go to crushorganics.com, use the code NEEL, N-E-E-L, and that's Crush Organics with a K. We've got Comedy Untamed shows all across the East Coast. Well, Melbourne, Sydney, and Newcastle. That's basically the East Coast. The Melbourne show is popping off. I was there last Thursday, and they're really developing their own style, their own vibe to the show. It's right in the CBD of Melbourne. So go to comedyuntamed.com if you want to see a great comedy/improv show. They hand out shots to people who get involved on stage. So if you like shots, go to Comedy Untamed in Melbourne. And other than that, thank you once again to everyone who has subscribed. If you're new to Sex Sells, if you've migrated from Neel and Jordan, welcome. And I hope you enjoy today's episode. All right, Eliza, you telling me it's your day off today? You enjoying it?
Loving it. I feel bad. Like every time we talk these days, I have nothing exciting to report. Back in the day, I'd be like, this happened. Now I'm like, yeah, it's the same old.
Same old. It's not
so the only news I had today was, Adrian's looking up for the baby all day.
I feel like it's not
so exciting.
If you're single, it's not as though you just live a crazy lifestyle either. Most people just have repetitive lives, don't they?
I would say so, yeah. True.
Yeah. There's like this weird stereotype where, if you're a parent, everything's boring and repetitive. But the vast majority of single people are living repetitive and boring lives as well. Who's out there living this crazy adventurous life? Even people who are self-expressed adventurers, I swear all their adventures are like going for a bushwalk and going to a cafe every weekend.
That's literally
and they're like,
me.
I love adventures. That's not an adventure. That's a repetitive bushwalk.
Just living. Yeah.
Yeah, it's living. That's being out in nature.
Yeah.
Have you been doing any nature-oriented activities lately?
Yeah, I went for a bushwalk like yesterday.
There you go.
With Remy. I had him strapped to my chest the whole time. It was sweaty and hot. It was way too hot, but it was fun. So there you go. I don't call them adventures. We call them bub ventures, which is cringe, but that's what we do. What's been happening with you, though?
I think you should lean into all the cringy mummy talk.
I can't. I know I'm becoming that person. I always post photos of him on my Instagram, and I'm like, oh, fuck.
Full-time mummy to this little bub.
I don't post the captions yet. Sometimes just a little love heart.
You're going to get there. I bet you in another year, you're going to be a full-time Insta mum.
Shit.
It's going to happen. What's been happening with me? Nothing, just the usual as well. Like I'm still trying to push those shows a lot, and we're slowly expanding. It's very exciting. We're currently looking to start up a Brisbane show, the Geelong show. I know I've said this a few podcasts, but the Geelong show should definitely be on sale. So Comedy Untamed's a big focus. I'm enjoying doing all the sort of serious videos that I'm doing on my YouTube channel, and still doing the sketches and just doing stand-up and living...
Still with your lover?
Yes, still Andrew and I going strong, nearly 2 years, so...
Oh my God, time. I feel like in my head it's just a brand new relationship. God, it just flies so fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, it still feels new, which is good, even though it's clearly not, but it's wonderful. So, you know what? Probably thanks to you in this podcast that it is so wonderful. Although I've had a few relationships in the past that weren't so wonderful, but look, it was probably more me. So this one's good. Makes me feel like, hey, I actually can be a good boyfriend. So
and
that's
she's
very
lovely
nice.
Too.
Yes. Yeah, you guys finally met. When was that? A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Got to see Remy. That was very cute. Very wholesome. You got the family dog, the baby. Nice little house out in the Central Coast. Living the dream.
Yeah, that was a cute little visit.
The Australian dream. Okay, so friend zoning. This is a nice change to some of our more recent podcasts, which were very serious. So we've done a podcast about the friend zone a couple of months ago, maybe even years ago now. Feels weird to say that.
Yeah, I don't even remember that.
So I think we can cover this topic again. And I want to focus on people who feel like they're constantly getting friend zoned. So there's a lot of men, a lot of younger men who tend to have this complaint. I get really close to a girl. I go on a few dates, and I always get friend zoned. Or I always get, oh, you're so nice, or you're like a brother to me, or basically, I like you and I like your attributes, but I don't necessarily want to date you. I'm not romantically interested in you. And there's a couple of responses to that. Some people perceive this as actually a sexist trope where, you only see value in women if they're sexually interested in you. And a lot of men see this as, well, I feel like I'm being almost gaslit by the wider community because I hear all these attributes that are supposedly so in demand and so well liked by women and younger women who are on the dating scene, and yet these just don't seem to get me anywhere. And it almost feels like there's a lopsided problem for each gender here, where women face too much sexualization, and then there's all these friend zone men who would love to be sexualized every now and again because after a while, if you're constantly being told how nice you are, yet no one wants to date you, you start to doubt yourself. You think, am I not attractive? Am I not worthy of love? Am I not a sexual opportunity for other people? And it can lead to a lot of insecurity, and it can lead to a lot of overthinking. And look, even when I was younger, I got friend zoned a fair bit, so I know what it's like. Most men know what it's like, and it's not nice. We're not here saying that it's the worst thing that can happen in the world. It's definitely not, but it's not nice if it's happening persistently and you feel like you just don't know what you're doing wrong. So I think I've got a few theories as to why a certain person might be getting friend zoned more than others. But what are your introductory thoughts on this topic?
Oh, I have heaps of thoughts about this, but interestingly, anytime a younger guy messages my Instagram, my podcast Instagram, it's always about being friend zoned. Always. It's like the older guys like our age.
I'm like 28, so old.
Anyone above 25 that messages me, it's usually about their relationship and things like that, or just positive feedback and nice things. Anyone under 25, it's always about, why am I getting friend zoned? This happens to me all the time, like heaps and heaps of essays trying to say, what went wrong here? This is what I did. This is what she said, all the time. And it's really hard when I am put into that position to answer that, because I'm like, I don't know your personality. So there's a lot of different ways it could be. Is it one, that you're not, igniting any sexual interest? Is it two, you're going after a specific woman? Or three, are there blind spots to you that you're not seeing? And I think that actually is more of a leading factor than most people realize, yet the least acknowledge, that there are parts of someone's personality that they're not even understanding that they have themselves. So those are my initial thoughts. What about you?
What would be an example of some of those parts of someone's personality that is continually landing them in the friend zone?
Well, sorry, don't hate me, but once upon a time I have been a chronic friend zoner. And in that time of my life, I was way too nice to basically men as a younger woman, and making sure that they felt really comfortable, and also wanting to keep myself safe after having so many. Every time I felt like I was being truly honest about how I felt about someone, if I didn't really connect with them, I've so often met with aggression or like abuse and those kind of things. So I think that what women are conditioned to be polite and be, nice and let people down gently. That's really part of, I guess, just, social conditioning. And I think that it's much more comfortable to say, like, you're so nice and you're so lovely. I had a really great time, but I just don't feel a spark there. I'd love to be your friend instead, etc. It's much more comfortable to say that than to say, I actually find that you're a little bit egotistical, or I find that your views are offensive to me, or whatever. So now I wouldn't do that now. I mean, I'm basically married, but if I was single, I definitely wouldn't do it.
You haven't actually had the marriage. I always forget about that.
Yeah, I'm planning it. It keeps getting pushed back because I got a baby. But yeah, so I would encourage anyone that gets friend zoned to actually say, like, I want to open the space for just a completely honest conversation. Do you have any, maybe not necessarily feedback, but is there more to this? This is a safe space for you to tell me, like, what you truly thought about why we didn't connect. Was it an attraction? Was there an issue? And things like that. Because the people that I have tended to friend zone previously are always the ones that also describe themselves as, I'm a really honest, hardworking guy. I am this, I'm really loyal, I'm devoted, I'm ABC, all these things that sound great, but then I'm seeing things in them that I'm like, I do not see that in you at all. I see things or behaviors or traits that I'm like, this is red flags to me, or serious incompatibilities. And yes, of course, it'd be easier or would be great to be able to say, I just don't think we're compatible for ABC, but unfortunately you'd be surprised how many people get so abusive just being told that. So I do think that this is more common of a factor. And just on that, as a little branch off as well, I think because it's so, and this is a heterosexual couple, situation. I'm talking about women and men. And it's very ingrained in women, and also probably in gay men and things like that, other people in the LGBT community, that to be hyper aware of our surroundings and our safety. And because we're always analyzing that in the people we meet, especially going on dates and things like that, we trust our intuition so strongly. So sometimes you meet someone, you can't even put a word to it, but you're just immediately like, no, this isn't going to happen. And we might be analyzing things or picking up things in our body. And that's why they would say women's intuition, it's a saying. So saying, I just see you as a friend is the gentlest letdown possible, whether or not it actually is the reason why they're not dating you.
Okay.
Does that make sense? That was a big ramble.
Yeah, that makes sense. The issue with that is the people who receive that message then rarely have the ability to reflect upon their behavior, because they're receiving a positive message and thinking, "Whoa, what? I'm just a nice guy all the time. I have all these great qualities, but you still don't want to date me, so I'm getting these mixed messages." I think men need to be more aware of responding in an aggressive way, so that it creates the space for people to be honest with someone that they're not romantically interested in, without feeling like they're going to cop a bunch of abuse. Having said that, if you've gone on 2 or 3 dates with someone and they've told you, I'm not romantically interested in you, and you respond with a message saying, hey, I just want to offer up a safe space for you to give me some honest feedback on my attributes of what you actually thought and why I maybe wasn't a romantic match for you. I don't know if people would get
I would
the
love that.
truth
That already
there.
makes my heart just beat. Like, I'd probably be like, oh my God, it's just message was so emotionally
Oh, there
mature.
you
I'll
go. That
probably
might
change my
actually,
mind.
there you go. That might get them out of the friend zone. But I just can't see that. That's
Yeah.
also asking a lot from the other person. Almost feels like a professional relationship more than anything.
Yeah.
Can I have some honest
That's,
feedback about my character? Because
yeah.
we're obviously very guarded with our attributes and our character. When it comes to dating, we're very vulnerable in that situation, and it's extraordinarily difficult to open yourself up to constructive criticism from
Yeah.
someone you've only known for 2 dates. And I would assume it would be quite an uncomfortable position for that person who did the friend zoning to be able
Yeah.
to
And
have that conversation. I mean,
it's also not their responsibility to be like, these are your flaws, you need to work on it. Maybe a simpler way would be, okay, fair enough. Thanks for letting me know. Just curious, what incompatibilities did you see? Or what was the misalignment here? So rather than being like, can I have feedback? Or it's just like, what makes us incompatible? I'm just curious. No pressure to respond or whatever. Might be a more
I think
opening way.
you can try that, but even then, because there's a few instances when I was single where I told someone, "Hey, I'm not really feeling a romantic connection. I'm just trying to think." If they sent me a message saying, "Could I ask what those incompatibilities were?" I feel like I was under a lot of pressure there, and think, "Wow, I don't. How honest do you want me to be at this point?" Because sometimes it's also just an overall feeling. It's not
Or
necessarily.
attractiveness.
Yeah, it's just the overall feeling of attraction isn't there. You can't necessarily put
Yeah.
your finger on what exactly the factor or factors were that
Just the vibe.
denied the ability for that attraction to manifest. Now, I would recommend a book to a lot of those younger guys in that situation. There's a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, and I remember reading that when I was, I think, 24 or 25, and that is one of those books that really did change my life. I think a lot of these guys who sort of self-identify as the nice guy, they have they have a nice guy gaze where they think all these other men who maybe have more dominant or confident or masculine traits must be jerks because
Yeah.
they're abrupt and because they're potentially abrasive and they're loud and they're boisterous and they go to the gym. None of those correlate with being an asshole. There's certain stereotypes that have emerged in society. So there's a few people who have those traits that tend to be assholes. But as I'm sure you would agree, there's plenty of self-described nice guys who also happen to be assholes. So saying you're the nice guy is just like saying I'm such a good person. I'm such a nice person. Well, everyone thinks they're a nice person. Everyone thinks they're a good person. It's a pretty simplistic and underwhelming way to identify yourself, to be honest, because I think that just should be a permanent attribute of anyone's character.
Yeah, that's the bare minimum. That's what I always say. Like, okay, we know you're nice, but everyone should be nice.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
that's the standard.
And now look, I had some views like that, particularly my late teen years, because I wasn't as boisterous and sport oriented as some of the other guys in my high school and even the peer group around me in university. And I sort of saw them as quite brutish and uncouth. And so I developed this narrative of, oh, they're uneducated and I'm the nice, smart guy. And if only women saw that. Well, really, I'm just concocting a narrative that makes me feel better about my situation. When if dudes drink beers and go to the gym, and I know the stereotype is, oh, those are the guys that are more likely to be sexist. But as a guy who now does drink beers and go to the gym, I kind of resent that stereotype. I don't think that correlation is as pronounced as society may have you believe. So I recommend that book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's a good middle ground without telling people to be this Andrew Tate style hyper masculine person who never takes shit from anyone and just constantly hits on every woman, but not being a pushover as well. There's times in your life where sometimes you shouldn't be the nice person if someone's actually, and I'm not talking about dating here, obviously, I'm just saying maybe in a professional relationship or a family relationship, if you're always being the nice guy or the nice person, well, you're going to get walked over. And sometimes people can actually sense that. And people don't want that in a romantic partner. They don't want someone who is not going to be able to stand up for themselves and stand up for their partner. They want someone who, when the context deems it to be necessary, can stand up for themselves. And I think a lot of people who see themselves as the nice guy are actually people pleasers. And nothing necessarily wrong with that until someone who actually wants to take advantage of you comes along, and those people exist, and then it's not a good attribute. Then it's a vulnerability, but it's a negative vulnerability. And you have to be okay saying no to people. You have to be okay having boundaries. I mean, this is something that women talk amongst themselves a lot about, and I think guys need to hear this as well. And again, I'm not just talking about dating here, but these sorts of attributes will also determine your dating success. But the problem with this sort of message is, without an adequate amount of emotional intelligence, it can become a very potentially dangerous message. If you're telling people, don't be a pushover, there are times when you need to stand up for yourself. Well, a man who maybe lacks a certain degree of emotional intelligence can take that upon himself to think, yeah, I can just go up to anyone at the bar and not read any emotional cues or signals, and I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm going to keep going. So really, the thing everyone should be developing is emotional intelligence. And there's a little bro science theory I just came up with actually before this podcast. So by all means, tell me if I'm being an idiot here. But it's safer for women and just society at large to encourage emotional intelligence in men, and not to say things like, we want a man to be confident and masculine and dominant, even though in certain contexts, if it's someone that you might be attracted to, or if it's a partner and it might be in the bedroom, a lot of people do want dominance and an emotionally intelligent display of male power, if you want to put it that way. But if you say things like that and people adopt those ideas without the emotional intelligence, that becomes very dangerous. If you start to tell young boys, yeah, you should be masculine, you should be dominant, well, without an adequate level of emotional intelligence, that is really dangerous. Whereas emotional intelligence without the masculinity is not dangerous. It might not necessarily always be the most attractive thing, but it's not dangerous. And so I wonder if, collectively there's that kind of underlying phenomenon going on, but that could just be me being an idiot. I think the other thing I'll just say, I've talked for a little bit here, is that you shouldn't be defining yourself based on what women or what society is asking for you. Now, there's always nuance and fine lines and gray areas to something like that. But if you are just thinking to yourself, oh, what do I have to do to get out of the friend zone? Well, there you go. That's the fact that you're thinking that way is probably a reason why you're getting friend zoned, because you're putting women on a pedestal and you think, I can only have value if I'm attractive to women, whereas often by actually having more value just in the things you're doing, in maybe your career and the way you present yourself and the habits that you maintain, that then becomes attractive. It's sort of the more you push for something, the more you try to force something. Isn't that just like the basic law of attraction? The further it will be repelled from you. So now you can, again, do that in an unhealthy way by being a fuckboy and kind of manipulating people, which that would be an interesting thing to explore. A lot of guys, I suppose, go down the nice guy fuckboy pipeline, if you want to call it that, where they're so sick of being a nice guy that they just become a villain and try to become a bad boy, but behind that bad boy persona is a nice guy who was hurt. And that's look, if you want to be a fuckboy and you're not doing it unethically and you just sort of want to sleep around and you make that clear and you're upfront about it, I guess go for it. But I don't think it's the best way to live your life. But I just think a lot of guys who are putting on that, particularly young guys who are putting on that bad boy facade, or I got to neg the girl every time, and I got to just be an asshole to her. That's almost like a coping mechanism. It's a defense mechanism for protecting themselves from the hurt of being rejected when they're being what they feel like is their genuine self. And also, one last thing, and again, I'm talking a lot here,
okay.
but younger girls are very different to women our age. And it's a lot of
Very good
inexperience there. And, you know, some things that maybe they might be more attracted to excitement rather than features of a quality partner. And that can happen for quite a few, you know, from, say, people start dating 14, 15 sometimes. Sometimes even Central Coast, probably 12. And then, you know, they're dating those sorts of people.
Really?
Yeah, probably. From, say, you know, it could be 13, 14 to 25, 26. And then they start to realize, I'm going to look for these other things. And by then, you know, men have, for 10 years, if you to a certain, I know I just said you should not let yourself be determined by what other people want from you, but to a certain extent, we're not immune to that. We are social creatures, and we're going to try to emulate the sort of behavior that is going to bring about success in the dating world. And if there's a lot of younger girls who want excitement and who want maybe even a bit of drama, you are going to try to integrate that into your personality, and that creates issues either way. So anyway, those are my long couple of thoughts on friend zoning, and tell me what you think about all of that.
I think you're spot on, and there's a reason why men that are fuckboys, and I know people hate when I use examples, but like Harrison from Married at First Sight, there's a reason why people like that date 19-year-old girls even though they're 30, because when you're young and you're not looking to settle down, that is exciting. Someone that's attractive, sexy, you know, super hyper masculine. This is, you know, I'm just speaking generically to a lot of straight women at young. But then when you're older, those traits of that person might be absolutely disgusting because you're not going to settle down with that. I remember when I dated someone who at that point, you know, was the greatest love of my life. We had a very like passionate, fiery relationship with lots of up and downs. We dated for a couple of years. My family loved him, but my mum was like to me, Eliza, like, settle down with someone that is, one, stable, and two, is going to be a good father to your kids, knowing that I wanted kids. And as I got older and I broke up with him and things like that, it's so interesting how what I viewed in a partner and what I wanted and what I found attractive changed drastically. And it's the same with men. Like, you know, they say, this is just anecdotal, but they say that men will at one point be very attracted when they're younger to a certain type of woman that might be, say, like slim and active and all these things, or when they get a bit older or more ready to settle down, they actually subconsciously may become more attractive, and I say maybe become more attractive to women that show childbearing qualities like hips or boobs. So that's an interesting little thing that, you know, our traits and desires do change over time, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. But yeah, what we want as a young person is very different to what we want. I guess it's what do you want out of your relationship is what it comes down to. So I think that's a really good point. And I like what you said about, you know, the nice guy, kind of describing yourself as a nice guy, because it can become dangerous. And I feel like when you know you're a really nice person, or you feel that you're a really nice person, yet you're getting constantly rejected or walked over because you're a people pleaser, you build resentment. And then when you're resentful, that's how, you know, the extreme is you may become an incel. And that's really how it's born, out of resentment. And I think that people don't realize that having strong boundaries and being assertive is not mutually exclusive with being a nice person. And you can actually be both. Like my friend's husband is one of those, you know, everyone describes him as really, really nice. And she said if anyone ever insulted him, it would literally be because he's too nice. Yet at the same point, she was telling me about how someone didn't come to the wedding, and instead of being like, oh, we won't say anything, he called him up literally the day after or whatever, after their wedding, and was like, hey mate, just wondering, why didn't you come? And the person kind of gave a bullshit example of why he didn't go to the wedding. And the husband was like, I know that's not true, but that's okay. Like, I know you're not telling the truth. That's okay. And that is a perfect example of niceness with assertiveness and boundaries as well, that you can literally have all of them. And people, like you said, that can be these self-proclaimed nice guys might look at someone that gets a woman and see those traits of assertiveness and be like, no, they're dickheads. And no, that's actually maybe a narrative that you've created yourself to make yourself feel better. And this will be coming up, I guess, in our next podcast when we talk about radical honesty and honesty with ourselves as well, which would be interesting. But another point that you touched on, which I think is really important, is when you complain about getting friend zoned, or when you're so conscious of being friend zoned or trying to get out of the friend zone. And like I said, that, you know, women can be extremely intuitive, and we can almost see the desperation or feel the desperation, and we can see the intention. And there's so much, you know, your energy holds so much, whether or not you believe that, it's true. Your energy holds so much. So if you're holding intentions of, I'm desperate to have sex with this person, or prove myself that I'm fuckable or whatever, that can be felt. And there's nothing that, you know, feels worse than someone that is, one, pressuring you, even subconsciously being like, oh, I know this guy's so desperate to get laid. That can just be a turn off, even if you naturally would have done it anyway. So, you know, I did talk about, I guess I've mainly touched on that negative factor of why you might be getting friend zoned, but there are, of course, other reasons. And I spoke about this maybe in the last podcast, but I had a housemate, and he is the loveliest person and genuinely the most genuine guy I've ever met. One of my favorite people in the world. He was such a nice person, and he constantly got friend zoned, and that was because he never wanted to make women feel uncomfortable. So he never wanted to be like, I don't want to touch someone without their consent. I don't want to push boundaries or like kind of pursue that just yet. I feel like it's better to make a friendship foundation first and then grow from that. But he'd be getting friend zoned every time he went on a date, because he never flirted. He never did any kind of like flirtatious banter, nothing like a little, even like a touch on the knee. He was like, I feel like that's inappropriate and could make a girl uncomfortable. And I would always try to like debate with him, being like, I'm sure that there are signs, like you're an intuitive person. You could see if someone's going to be uncomfortable if you nudge them on the shoulder when you have a little giggle or something, or tap their arm or tap their knee casually. It's not like you're sliding a hand up their leg on the first date. So that was an example of someone that, you know, and I do see this happen sometimes, and I think it's a really beautiful trait that he's so conscious of keeping women safe and comfortable, and I love that about him. But unfortunately, and everyone should be like that, in that, keeping that in the forefront of their mind, of course. But it was to a point that it actually gave him a lot of anxiety, and he was always stressing about that. Knowing, you know, he has a lot, majority of his friends were women. So he's heard a lot of stories, and he was so stressed all the time. If I do that, if I touch her, if I sit too close, if I offer to pick her up in my car, it's going to make her uncomfortable. And yeah, so he just got friend zoned repeatedly over and over again. And I would just push him, being like, go on a date and just like brush her hand or say something flirty, touch her leg, do something. And he would be like, that's not me. Anyway, he ended up being with a girl. Based on what he said, he built a friendship over like weeks and weeks and weeks, or maybe even months, and then it turned romantic. So his way worked in the end, but God, did he face so many friend zones and rejections because he just wouldn't put out that kind of sexual chemistry there, which is an important part. Attractiveness is a hugely important part. And even me, dating previously, and even with Adrian, actually, there were times in our first couple of dates where I was immediately already in my mind about to reject him, even though I really liked him, because he hadn't ever tried to crack a move on me. We'd been on like 3 dates or 4 dates. He'd never tried to kiss me, never tried to touch my arm. And I was like, I don't think this guy is into me. I'm just like, fuck this. whatever. And then I literally said to him at the end of the day, I made a joke about how he hadn't kissed me yet. And then we kissed and everything was magical since then, soulmates, whatever. But it was just, and he was like, I just didn't want to like make you feel pressured or anything. So he was the same. But not everyone is going to have that confidence or capacity that I had to be like, why haven't you kissed me yet? You know, that's an uncomfortable question to ask because you might be faced with a harsh response or get like fully rejected. And had I not asked that, maybe I would have never seen him again because I'm like, okay, we've been on like 4 dates, nothing's happened. There's no like, he's never flirted with me once, never touched me, never kissed me. Maybe this isn't a thing. So thank God I asked or pressed him or whatever. Took the reins.
Yeah, there'd be no Remy.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, that wedding story, just on a side note, that made me feel a bit guilty about something I did recently. But anyway, I didn't ghost someone's wedding. Okay, well, very quickly. Okay. I was invited to a guy from high school's wedding. I was not that close. I'm not that close with this guy. We were not friends in high school. We've never really caught up. And I had the suspicion he and his fiance wanted me there because of my profile. Now, I didn't know that for sure, but I had that suspicion. And I was like, all right, whatever, I'll go. And I put in $300 for the boys were all staying beforehand and stuff. And it was sort of right in the midst of in between the lockdowns and things like that. And one, it was near that last breakup I had, and also some work opportunities came up. And as you know, my industry was so distraught. Yeah. I called him. I gave him a few days' notice. Not many days. I was like, whatever, I've paid for the accommodation. You know, you guys all keep that. And I said, hey, look, I'm really sorry. I did on Facebook Messenger. I'm sorry, I won't be able to make it. And I would have thought at a wedding with, there's a lot of people going there, you would expect a few people might drop out just due to circumstances. But, man, he did not like that. So, I don't know. Am I the... Reddit.com, am I the asshole? I don't think I am.
You should do it.
What do you think? I don't know that. I'm not that guy. If it was a close friend, I definitely would have gone. I barely know that guy.
Yeah, it's hard. The only reason I would say you're not the asshole in the sense that, when Adrian and I are planning our wedding at the moment, and we're like, the more people that don't want to go, the better, because whatever, it's less money, it's etc. But then that being said, if you're paying $150 or $250 or $300 per head and someone bails, or you've said no to someone else's plus one because you have to keep your list at however many people, I do see the frustration in that. But that being said, like, your reason, especially with what was happening in your industry at that time, is a very solid reason. It's not like you're like, a CBF. Like, it was a literal work opportunity for you. I would be very understanding of that. That would make sense to me.
It was work, and then I didn't want to see two people celebrate their love as well. There was a little bit of that.
It's too raw.
So yeah, there was a bit of that, and I didn't really know the guy. So I even offered him, like, hey man, if it cost you whatever it cost you, I'll pay you that. And then he just he was not having any of it anyway. So okay, maybe I'm the asshole. Who knows? No accountability. It's that guy's fault, man. I'm the nice guy. I'm perfect,
totally.
Bro. Now I forgot what we were talking about. Friend zoning, of course. You made a good point there to say that. Yeah, look, what I tend to do, and what maybe we both tend to on this podcast, is always sort of put the blame on the person who's experiencing these things and say, all right, if you're being friend zoned, it's probably because you're got this identity of a nice guy and you're doing the wrong things, when there are also people who are genuinely trying their best, and maybe they don't have it in them to be flirty, to be able to have that banter and sexual chemistry doesn't come naturally to them, or maybe they're not that...
Or they may be neurodivergent.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Which is a whole other kettle of fish, and probably extremely common. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's a situation where you can't really say to someone like that, oh, you just need to work on this, you need to work on that, because their brain is wired completely differently. And I wonder if there's, certain communities or That could be another podcast to do. But there's also just guys like the one you mentioned who's not necessarily doing anything wrong, has the best intentions, and just gets friend zoned quite a lot. And it can, like you say, lead to a lot of resentment, and then they can completely switch and become that's their villain origin story.
Yeah.
And it's really hard because, you know, in all the characteristics that you need to be able to be perceived as romantic, as sexually interested, you are treading a fine line. You're telling people, hey, flirt with them. Hey, maybe make a few sexual comments. Hey, when the opportunity arises, do put your hand on their knee and put your hand on their back. And you are potentially risking a lot of discomfort and maybe even some really bad situations. But I think as a society, we have to get to a point where we say, okay, look, in the awkward world of dating, especially casual dating for people who are young, there are going to be some awkward situations, and there are going to be some situations where someone could feel uncomfortable without anyone having the intention to make that person feel uncomfortable. And as long as there's a agreement of what to do then and how to articulate that, then I don't think there's anything too dangerous or nefarious in teaching younger boys, hey, look, this is how you do flirt in a healthy way. This is how you do integrate that kind of masculine energy into your personality, but how to also hint at it without it being overblown and coming across as egotistical. And again, I think it comes back to what I was saying before, where at least from my life and experiences, it's about, you know, having the potential to be dominant and confident and all these, you know, traditionally masculine attributes, but controlling it in a way that's emotionally intelligent and only really showing glimpses of it when it's appropriate in the context. And that is a skill. That's a learned skill. That's something I could definitely not do at 18. Let alone 24. I probably still, there's probably still times where I'm not that perfect at it now, but that is something, it's very hard to teach something like that. It's very hard to say, for people who maybe are, whether they're neurodivergent, but are more sort of systematizing type of people, there is no real handbook. There's no code of conduct or behavioral guidelines to say, when she does, I do this. When you do that, do that. That doesn't exist. It's all about just reading the situation. I mean, maybe you can have a few little vague ideas about what to say, when to do this, when to escalate, and when to go for a kiss. But it really is all about reading the emotional situation, isn't it? And that's not something. It's very hard to teach something like that because it's not like any other subject. It's not like maths where there are rules that are consistent and you can say, all right, always in this situation, this is when you do this. It's just about reading the social situation. And the only thing, if you're developing social skills in other areas that aren't dating, I can't see how that would hurt if you, as a teenager, are going out to parties and socially interacting and embracing things that are maybe awkward and trying to learn from it, and going out and talking to people, just men, women, anyone in a platonic way, and just developing the skill of just social intelligence and charisma. That is something that's going to help you a lot in the world of dating if you find yourself persistently being friend zoned. And I remember I watched this French movie the other day, and I think it was even called Friendzone, but there's a nurse, is a very sort of clean cut. It's always these sorts of guys that are always in the romantic comedies, aren't they? It's there's always this sort of a guy, and then there's always a bad boy, and then she first falls with a bad boy, and then he feels bad, and then eventually she's like, "Oh, you were the one." It's just tired, and it's always the same story, isn't it? But
I love that you were watching that.
yeah, I'm trying to learn French, but it's
wow.
Yeah, that's gonna take a while. Just on that Duolingo. I don't know, like 17 lessons in or whatever. So it's going to be a while. But I was watching this, and he was friends with these three women, and they could see that he was always getting friend zoned, that he was always the nice guy, the good friend. And so it was pretty ironic seeing that their strategy, and this is a movie, so by all means, like this is, like I said, this is a fun podcast. their strategy was to help him develop some of those more, sort of dominant, confident, charismatic qualities. They also got him to dress in a more suave way. He'd always wear sort of t-shirts and jeans, and then they got him in a nice clean-cut suit and got a good haircut on him. But then, he did become a villain for a while. He became a bit of an arsehole, and then a big point in the movie was him actually yelling at them, like, "You've made me into this arsehole," where a girl that actually was interested in him then stopped being interested in him because he had developed all these kind of qualities that can be also off-putting, and so it was this big minefield. And I found it very interesting that they were basically teaching him game, which is something that is often perceived to be problematic and an issue in society. But that's, I mean, I don't think the writers were consciously trying to get these women to teach this guy pick up artistry and game. But the things they were saying to him, like, when she does this, you say that. When she leans in, you do this. All these things are what young boys or younger men learn in game, and I wonder if there's a healthier form of, or I mean, and I don't even think whether it's healthy or unhealthy. There's definitely there's a toxic side to that sort of area of the internet, but some of the basic teachings and bastions of game can be good and can help men. However, it's then what you do with it, right? It's if you're then going to go on and basically just try to sleep with as many women as you can. Look, again, if it's all consensual, go for it. But I don't think that's a particularly good way to live your life.
Exactly,
so all of this is isn't it such a minefield, because you want to, and I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this who are maybe friend zone and getting frustrated because they think, well, you're saying you can't, there is no guidelines, there's no exact thing I have to do, I just have to read the cues. Well, I mean, it's almost like that's the best thing you can say at this point, because if you say direct things like, oh, be more masculine, confident, make a move, put your hand on her knee, put your hand around her, you are creating a greater potential for discomfort on the woman's part. Now, those are things, you should do in the context when it's appropriate, but to develop the skill of knowing when that's appropriate, it takes time. And it also can, if you're a young guy trying to learn this, you can sometimes make those mistakes, and that's how you learn from it. Now, as long as the cost of that mistake is not, if it's discomfort, I think hopefully people can sort of understand, all right, that guy didn't necessarily mean to put his arm around my shoulder. He thought it was appropriate at the time. But of course, there's a line to which then you can't cross. But like with any skill, you're never going to be that good at it when you start doing it. Some people are naturals, and some people are not. And you have to go on a lot of dates and a lot of awkward dates sometimes, and you have to learn when to. You should always err on the side of being cautious, but eventually, like with your friend, you gotta kind of escalate, and you gotta. If you think, all right, it seems like this is the appropriate time to lean in for a kiss, there's a time when you got to bite the bullet and just do it. But like I said, it's how do you feel as a woman hearing something like that? Because I would guess it's a very fine line to tread, because you're sort of telling boys also, oh, look, be a bit more sexually aggressive when the time is appropriate, but also know when that time is, and it's very convoluted, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to balance. And I remember I went on a date once with a guy, and he picked me up from his car, and we drove like, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes. So we had a semi-long time to have a chat and get to know each other in the car. And we've been talking for weeks beforehand. And in the car ride, I was kind of thinking, we're on our way to dinner, but I already can tell I don't think I'm vibing it with him. I didn't think the attraction was there. Anyway, when we got out of the car, he immediately went and held my hand, like interlocked our fingers together, and I was like, oh, a little bit, whatever. I didn't care too much. I didn't pull my hand away. I just left it there. And he squeezed my hand, and then he goes, "I'm in," or something. Or he said it maybe later on, like I knew I was in. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, it's my sign. I can always tell when a woman wants me. When I always go to hold her hand. I drive her to a date, I hold her hand, I squeeze it, and if she squeezes back, I know she wants me. And I was like, but did I fucking squeeze back? Shit. Like, I didn't think I squeezed back. I didn't want to squeeze back. Take back my squeeze. But yeah, that was completely misread. So it is one of those things to balance. Like, you have to take in the social cues. You have to take in, the flirtatious banter. I would always say, previously, I would say, like, on a non-professional note, to my friends, that a safer option is, like, when you're walking, a little a hand rested on the back, like not an arm around, just a hand touch on the lower back. Because my friend, when she went on a date, a guy did this. When they were walking home, she wasn't into him, so she just walked half a step further and the hand broke off. That was it. That was his sign, and he knew. He didn't try anything from there. It was done. And then this has been done to me, and I've been into a guy. And first of all, I find it like quite gentlemanly and nice. And then if you start a little touch, I leant into it instantly. Leant into him, like into his arm, into his side. And I think that's like a key point, as much as I don't want to give advice on it, because you can always kind of go wrong. But if I were to give advice, it would be start and instigate a tiny touch that is appropriate. And if that is one amplified or responded to with someone else, that's a green light. I did this when on that date I went with Adrian, where he still hadn't kissed me. And in the movies, we went to the movies, cliche, and I was like, he's not even holding my hand in the movies. And I was like, I couldn't even watch the movie. I was thinking about the whole time we're just sitting there like side by side. We can't talk. We barely know each other. So I just put my hand on his arm. And then immediately upon doing that, he grabbed my hand and held it the whole movie. It was like once I had broken the touch barrier and he knew this is okay, he went with it. So maybe you can take that as a cue. Instead of, you can try break the touch barrier appropriately, or you can wait and see if someone actually touches that with you, because there have certainly been times where I had, maybe reached out or touched someone's leg and laughed, and that is a way of flirting, but it's gone over their head. Whereas I find that women are much more able to pick up when a man is attracted to them than vice versa. That being said, like I said before, it is really hard if you're neurodivergent, and I'd love to do a podcast on, should you be disclosing, or is it a good idea to disclose beforehand if you are, to workplaces, to romantic potential partners, and how to kind of navigate that, I think would be a good thing to explore. But it is really hard to be like, do I look for this? Do I look for that? And I'm all for just being upfront and asking, like checking in and being like, would be more than happy if a guy asked me on his date and be like, hey, do you reckon we're vibing? Like, do you reckon this is like, this is a vibe,
really?
you and I? Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's fine. Like, and if someone gets turned off by that question, so fucking what? Like, who cares? If someone's like, oh my God, he asked me if I think we're connecting while we're on a romantic date. Like, okay, that's her problem or his problem for getting so up in arms and offended or icked by that. Like, it's such a simple question. I think it's just better to just be upfront and be like, I'm curious. Like, I've certainly asked guys, been like, so, like, now that you've met me, like, are you, like, attracted to me? And basically every time it's been met with something positive. And if not, that never happened, but I probably wouldn't care. Like, if someone was like, yeah, I'm really liking our chat, but I don't see this, this isn't a thing, I'd be like, cool, thanks, yeah, whatever. Like, this thing, I know, like, we always talk about, like, it's kind of like a game at some point where you're kind of throwing things out and seeing what is returned, catch and serve, whatever. But serve and return, I mean, but you can just ask, and I'm all for, like, asking for a kiss. I've had so many men, I mean, this makes me sound like a whore, but I don't care. I've had so many guys be like, can I kiss you on a first or second date? And I love that. I think that's, like, wholesome and kind of sexy. Like, I'm not, like, all like, he asked me, just do it. You can just ask. And if someone's like, the fact that you asked me, sorry, that turns me off, well, that's on them, you're incompatible.
Yeah, asking's probably, if you're unsure at that point, asking's probably a good strategy.
Yeah.
And yeah, some people might be turned off by that, but still better to just
Yeah, it's on them.
If
It's not
anything,
on you.
yeah, that probably says something about them. Yeah, isn't it funny how much of a minefield this is? Wow. I think if you're a young guy as well waiting,
Yeah.
look, you're gonna get, if you're in your 19, 20, 21, it's just, yeah, people aren't that confident then, and they
Yeah,
haven't
it's harder
really.
when you're younger. It's much harder. People
It
would say it's
is.
easier. It's not. Yeah, it's harder.
It's so much harder because you don't have the confidence to maybe just express exactly what you want. It's all very much a game. And no, I definitely enjoyed dating much more in my mid 20s than my early
Yeah,
20s. Just so much
same.
less awkward, and I had a lot of awkward times where I, went in for a kiss and she was like, "What are you doing?" and things like that, and it's not nice. So
Oh yeah,
it's
that
very
sucks.
awkward, and you don't want to do it. As a guy, you don't want to make it awkward. You want it to be smooth. You want it to be romantic. You
Sexy.
want it to be sexy. You want it to be
Yeah,
like the movies, and
yeah,
it's like I said, like with any skill, it takes practice, and you have to be willing to put yourself into a position where you're going to get rejected, because if you're not going to learn. And if you're too worried about just being rejected, whether that's a kiss or just being put in the friend zone, well then, if you're just going to avoid it because you're scared of that, well, then you're not going to be able to learn from it. And you have to be willing to put yourself in that physically vulnerable position, within reason, obviously. But uh, I don't think those dating gurus and dating coaches, a lot of them are pretty cringy. I've seen a few of them, and I wouldn't be going out. I know some people pay a lot of money for these kind of guys, and look, if it's a $30 book or something, go for it. But some of these
or unless
courses
it's
are,
me, you can
oh,
come
of
for
course,
me.
yeah, yeah. Some of these courses are just unbelievable.
Dodgy.
Yeah, two hundred
Yeah,
dollars a
they just
session,
teach you
and
how to be misogynistic,
yeah, I mean they
in my
teach
opinion.
they prey on the resentful nice guy,
Mm.
and
They
uh,
use that as like the motivator.
it's a villain or yeah, it's kind of a villain
Yeah,
origin story, and
yeah.
they and but the really the thing, we're sort of getting to the hour point here, but as you've touched on in previous podcasts, and I have too, we are also not immune to our animal and biological impulses. And sometimes that kind of asshole is very attractive because, in a Darwinian context, this is a guy who has traits that hint at the fact that he'd be able to obtain resources, he'd be able to dominate other people, he'd be able to win in the social game, if you will. And so, for a lot of people, that can be subconsciously attractive, and there's also a process of sexual selection, female sexual selection, more than anything, that is amplified in an online dating, casual dating environment. And what I mean by that is, say, in the animal world, there's certain animals where there's more female agency in the males of the species that they choose, right? So for birds, and most bird species and things, the men will do a little dance or make a nest or something, or the peacock will display their feathers, and then the women ultimately choose, do I want to mate with them? Whereas I think it's the sea lion, or just in I think gorillas, in some species that are very patriarchal, you could say, basically the male that just essentially kills all the other men gets to mate with a huge portion of the females. And they found that this is in a book, Evolution of Beauty, really interesting. They found that in the species with more female mate choice, the animals were far more colorful and vibrant, and would do things like sing songs and do dances like with birds. And then in the species where there was just complete male, one dominant alpha male that has a harem, it was always just the biggest, strongest, most aggressive species. And so I wonder if now, because we live in a world where there's a lot of female agency, there's a lot of female sexual selection, and then there's also a very casual dating market in big cities. What we're seeing is the sexual selection behavioral consequences of that. So as much as like I said, men should not just define their entire personality and characteristics based on what they think women want. We're never entirely immune to this. We're still animals who want to mate, right at the bottom of our brains there. And, we're going to want to try and emulate characteristics that will give us mating success. And if we have this kind of casual dating environment where there's a lot of younger women who are making choices as well, whether that's going to not in and no way is this sort of blaming women or anything like that, but whether just those factors will actually encourage those more bad boy-esque, Harrison from Maps, Machiavellian type behavior in men. I know that's the Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot, how he's saying online dating and the way dating is now, it actually encourages men to be assholes because you get more success being an asshole than you do being not I wouldn't say nice guy, but not an asshole.
I feel like times have changed since he started saying that, maybe like 10 years ago. But I don't know. I think, in my opinion, I take my views a little bit about, evolutionary biology and things like that are actually changing a little bit. And there's newer research coming out that's basically saying that it may not be as much of a driving force as we have previously believed it to be. Because when you think about it, back in the day when we had tribes and we're using our reptilian brain, it's all about survival, mating. Our brains have evolved so much that we are so heavily in this day and age led by our neocortex brain. It's the most evolved, that we think more with logic rather than about survival these days. So of course there's still intrinsic drives, but I don't think that they are maybe as powerful or potent as has previously been made out to be. So, and this is one of the interesting things, I guess, about science and research, is that you might believe something and it's been said for hundreds of years, and now it's like, maybe not, just kind of like how all of a sudden they're finding out recently that there may have been up to 40 to 50% of women hunters. So it wasn't just that men were hunters and women were gatherers. Maybe it was actually shared amongst many tribes around the world. So who really knows? But I think that another important point that I really want to touch on is that men are not the only ones that are friend zoned, and women can be friend zoned too. And I find that this can be particularly accurate for women that aren't hyper feminine. And then I guess that actually does fall back into the biology aspect of it, or the intrinsic nature, that if someone doesn't have long hair or boobs or an ass or hips, or isn't have a high-pitched voice, isn't flirtatious, wear makeup or whatever, isn't a feminine person, my friends that aren't feminine looking, or maybe in their personality aren't that feminine, find it so hard to get guys attracted to them, and they're straight. So I think that is another aspect as well. It's, in the same point, we can look at men getting rejected being like, oh, women have all the power, but it's like, yeah, women have all the power if they fit into the box that men find attractive. So it does, it's completely equal. It goes both ways in that sense. So I just want to put that as a little disclaimer. And the last thing I want to say, another factor is that if you find you've been consistently put into the friend zone for either or all genders, have a look at, is there a specific type of person that you are heavily attracted to? Because there are people that have childhood wounds or trauma, whatever, that are specifically attracted or subconsciously drawn to people that they are knowing will reject them. Or that's one. Or two, you may have low self-esteem and a narrative about yourself saying, I can't get women, no one's attracted to me. So you are subconsciously, your ego always wants to prove yourself right. So your ego is going out and finding women that aren't going to be attracted to you and that are going to reject you to further prove to yourself, my narrative about myself is correct. So there's a lot of things to consider. And I guess the takeaway message from me is, not only do you have to read the social cues and, all these things, but you have to look really take a step back and do a bird's eye view on what's going on. Who are you attracted to? Who are you dating? What are your reasons if you're getting friend zoned? Are you getting reasons? Is there any patterns? Are you actually honest with yourself about your personality traits, and are there blind spots that you might have? I think that it's a big reflective moment for us all to have if you're, finding yourself getting friend zoned a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably should have touched on the women who get friend zoned as well. It's less common, but yeah, you are right. But then that sort of, if they're not getting romantic interest because they're perceived as less feminine, then doesn't it sort of show that we're not as in touch with our logic brain as we maybe think we
exactly.
are?
That's what I said. There's another contradictory. Who knows? Who
Yeah.
really knows? I just don't want people to get driven by that, being like, I have to be macho or dominant. I don't want that to be the takeaway message, because people might use their logic brain and be like, okay, I'm looking at starting, or maybe this is actually even your primitive brain being like, I'm looking at starting a family. I need a man that is sensitive, emotionally mature, that is kind and gentle. Like maybe that's the 2023 version of what we need in order to procreate. Whereas hundreds of years ago, you would need someone that's a good fighter and a good resource gatherer. You know, that's what I mean by like times are changing, and it's really like the way our brains have developed and our attraction has developed as well over time.
That's very true. And in this day and age, to be a good father, it's not the same traits that you would have needed in a dangerous environment. And I mean, I could do a joke about this, but I always thought it would be funny if they had like a Bachelor or Maths Housewives version where there's a very dangerous environment. And I don't know if women would be like, I want him to be sensitive and vulnerable. They'd be like, oh, fuck, I want him to be able to punch on at any moment. So
Shank someone. Yeah.
the environment definitely determines what is attractive well, just to a certain degree, what may be attractive to the opposite partner.
And your upbringing, your parent, everything.
Yeah,
So many
I guess
factors.
the newer ideas are coming about more in the context of online dating and how that's changed. Which is another podcast in itself, like how online dating has changed. Dating apps, I should say specifically, because it does, commodifies everyone, and it's a very fast-paced. What is exciting to me? What is titillating? What is gonna, gain my interest? So that maybe has brought out, just some of those more reptilian instincts more so than people realized. But as you say, there's a lot of research that kind of points in all sorts of directions, and there's so many ways to interpret that, and there's no real consensus on what these sorts of what the collective conclusions are about dating today. And on an individual level, I think if you are being friend-zoned, all the things you say are correct. If you've got a narrative about yourself that you're constantly being friend-zoned, now this is going to sound weird. Even if you always have been friend-zoned, you sort of have to lie to yourself a little bit and tell yourself, no, I am attractive. I am a very attractive man. And you just keep kind of telling yourself that. You'll start acting in a way that you are. And there's a lot of YouTube channels with affirmations about that. There's one, Mindful Wave Studio, is really good. So all of those sorts of things do help. And yeah, it would be good to do a podcast on how dating apps have changed. Not just dating, but society. I think that'll be a really interesting one. Yeah. Any final thoughts on people who are always getting friend zoned?
Good luck. And yeah, just like you said, I think it just comes down to an emotional maturity and having, the understanding of your psychology. Look up self-fulfilling prophecies. Look up, analyze. I don't want to say analyze your childhood, but just knowing yourself and knowing who you are is going to be the key to this, to figuring this out. That's really it.
That's very true. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Share this podcast if you liked it. Subscribe on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SexSalesPodcast. Instagram, Sex Sales Podcast, TikTok. We're all over the place. The best way to grow a podcast is with people sharing it, telling their friends about it. So anything that you do in that regard would be greatly appreciated. Thanks very much, guys. See you next week.